I have enlisted two of our go-to MSNBC legal analysts, Charles Coleman, a civil rights attorney, and Catherine Christian, former Manhattan Deputy District Attorney. Okay, Catherine, in a rare public statement earlier this year, Special Counsel Jack Smith, he made a point to say that the law applies to everyone, even a former president. So do you think that all of the Trump indictments together are a test or a reckoning, if you will, for the rule of law in this country?
I don't know if it's a reckoning, but it proves the fact that this former president of the United States has been indicted in 4 different jurisdictions, 2 state and 2 federal, that he isn't above the law. Yes, he's innocent until proven guilty, and there will be, well, he would prefer there not be trials, but presumably there will be at least one trial before the November 24 election. So yes, the fact that he has been indicted shows that he is not above the law.
You know, Charles, officials like Fani Willis in Fulton County and even Tish James here in New York, they have stood strong in the face of criticism from Trump, but also other attorneys. Not you or Catherine Christian, but there's some people in the legal community that were very critical of what they were doing. What did you make of their show of prosecutorial strength this year?
Well, I think people need to understand the role of the prosecutor. And when you're talking about all of the examples you gave, both Letitia James and Fani Willis, and then you add into the mix Alvin Bragg right here in Manhattan, as well as, of course, Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, you are seeing prosecutors do exactly what it is that they do. It's not unusual, unfortunately, speaking as a former prosecutor, and I'm sure Catherine can attest to this as well, that prosecutors are derided simply for doing their jobs. But I do think it's important to point out that when you're talking about what we've seen this past year from Donald Trump, his acolytes, and all of his supporters, there's a notion of white nationalism that has garnered a particular vitriol that has been directed both at Alvin Bragg as well as Fani Willis and Letitia James. And that's something that needs to be called out. Prosecutors are not above criticism. We are, at the end of the day, public servants. But when you're talking about some of the attacks that we've seen, it has risen to another level. And that's something that really, really has the potential to become even more dangerous from a safety concern when you're talking about upholding one of America's most fundamental democratic institutions in our courts.
I mean, also the attacks on Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is overseeing the federal election interference case. You know, Catherine, this brings to mind for me that these indictments of Donald Trump, that they've been tests of political speech versus protecting the legal process. I mean, there have been some limited protective orders implemented in some cases. Let's look ahead to the trials coming up in 2024. Are you at all worried about this becoming a bigger issue that judges and lawyers will have to reckon with?
Yeah, well, the First Amendment does not protect speech that is used as an instrument of crime. So, you know, Donald Trump can and his lawyers can say, you know, it's political speech. He's being prosecuted for political speech. That's just not accurate. He's being prosecuted for actions that he took and that people acting on his behalf took. I always say I was a financial fraud prosecutor. Fraudsters use the gift of gab in order to commit their fraud. So I'm not concerned. I mean, his lawyers on the 4 different indictments are going to throw everything up on the wall to see if it sticks. That's what defense attorneys do. But my only concern is, will these cases ever be tried? The election interference one, the federal one, is scheduled for March 4th. That's now on hold because we're determining, well, the special counsel is hoping that the Supreme Court will take it and sort of leapfrog over the District Court of Appeals, but that may not happen. So it's really, will justice, and justice can be an acquittal, will that happen before November 24?
Will justice happen before November 2024? We don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Charles, I want to talk about the future of voting rights because we saw the Supreme Court uphold Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act this year, which was consequential. But then we also saw in the same year, particularly it was a lower court that kind of undid that whole thing. And now in 7 states across the country, it says that only the government can sue under Section 2, not any other entities like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund or independent lawyers. Are you concerned about the implications of this ruling, this lower court ruling, and what it will mean going forward?
Well, Simone, how could I not be? As a civil rights attorney, in part, one of the things that people need to understand is that when you are talking about the future of Section 2 and the Voting Rights Act, what you are really looking to do is make this a political discussion. And what I mean by that is when you leave it up to the government and the only people who are empowered to actually sue when you're talking about the potential infringement upon people's right to vote ends up being the federal government and the DOJ, the problem with that is a Bill Barr DOJ, a Jeff Sessions DOJ looks very different than a Merrick Garland DOJ, where Kristen Clark is the head of the Civil Rights Unit. And so those people who are making those decisions will have political leanings and inclinations. And those inclinations should not be the thing upon which someone's right to vote rests. And that's the problem with the elimination of Section 2 and what we're seeing in states across the country. So yes, it's very concerning. It's something that we should keep an eye on. But more importantly, Simone, we have to have a strategy. We did not get to Brown versus Board of Education or any of the milestone legal victories that we've seen fought through the courts without a strategy. Unfortunately, and I have to say this, you don't get to Dobbs and the reversal of Roe v. Wade without a strategy. And so the question going forward for next year, for 2024, when you're talking about the courts and when you're talking about that use, what's the strategy?
What is the strategy? We're not going to find a strategy today, but Catherine Charles is asking some good questions. Charles Coleman, Catherine Christian, thank you both very, very much.